Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Fifth Elephant by Terry Pratchett, Part 3. There was a hamlet down there, where two rivers met. Hamlet, a small town or village. A small village, hamlet. There was a hamlet down there, where two rivers met. There would be boats. This was working. The slopes behind him were white and free of dark shapes. No matter how good they were, let them try to outswim a boat. Hard, packed snow crunched under his feet. He staggered past the few rough hovels, saw the jetty, saw the boats, fought with the frozen rope that moored the nearest one, grabbed an oar and pushed himself out into the current. There was still no movement on the hills. Now, at last, he could take stock. It was a bigger boat than one man could handle, but all he had to do was fend off the banks. That'd do for tonight. In the morning he could leave it somewhere, perhaps ask someone to get a message through to the tower, and then he'd buy a horse and, behind him, under the tarpaulin in the bows, something started to growl. They really were very clever. In a castle not far away, the vampire Lady Margolota sat quietly, leafing through Twerp's Peerage. It wasn't a very good reference book for the countries on this side of the Ramtops, where the standard work was the Almanac de Gothic, in which she herself occupied almost 4 pages. Footnote 2. Vampires evolve long names. It's something to do to pass the long years. End footnote 2. It wasn't a very good reference book for the countries on this side of the Ramtops, where the standard work was the Almanac de Gothic, in which she herself occupied almost 4 pages. But if you needed to know who thought they were who in Ankh-Morpork, it was invaluable. Her copy was now bristling with bookmarks. She sighed and pushed it away. Beside her was a fluted glass containing a red liquid. She took a sip and made a face. Then she stared at the candlelight and tried to think like Lord Veterinary. How much did he suspect? How much news got back? The Clacks Tower had only been up for a month, and it was being roundly denounced throughout Bonk as an intrusion. But it seemed to be doing a good, if stealthily, local traffic. Who would he send? His choice would tell her everything. She was sure. Someone like Lord Rust or Lord Selachii. Well, she'd think a lot less of him. From all that she had heard, and Lady Margolota heard a lot of things. The Ankh-Morpork diplomatic corps, as a whole, could not find its backside with a map. Of course, it was good business for a diplomat to appear stupid, right up to the moment where he'd stolen your socks. But Lady Margolota had met some of Ankh-Morpork's finest, and no one could act that well. The growing howling outside began to get on her nerves. She rang for her butler. Ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding. Yes, mistress, said Igor, materializing out of the shadows. "Go and tell the children of the night to make wonderful music somewhere else, will you? I have a headache." "Indeed, mistress." Lady Margolota yawned. It had been a long night. She'd think better after a good day's sleep. As she went to blow out the candle, she glanced again at the book. There was a marker in the V's. But surely even the patrician couldn't know that much. She hesitated and then pulled the bell rope above the coffin. Eagle reappeared in the way of eagles. "Those keen young men at the Clacks Tower will be awake, won't they?" "Yes, mistress." "Send the Clacks to our agent asking for everything about Commander Vimes of the Watch, will you?" "Is he a diplomat, mistress?" Lady Margolota lay back. "No, Igor. He's the reason for diplomats. Close the lid, will you?" Sam Vimes could parallel process. Most husbands can. They learn to follow their own line of thought while at the same time listening to what their wives say. And the listening is important, because at any time they could be challenged and must be ready to quote the last sentence in full. A vital additional skill is being able to scan the dialogue for telltale phrases such as, "and they can deliver it tomorrow," or "so I've invited them for dinner," or "they can do it in blue really quite cheaply." Lady Sybil was aware of this. Sam could coherently carry an entire conversation while thinking about something completely different. "I'll tell Willykins to pack winter clothes," she said, watching him. "It'll be pretty cold up there at this time of year." "Yes, that's a good idea." Vimes continued to stare at a point just above the fireplace. "We'll have to host a party ourselves, I expect, so we ought to take a cartload of typical Ankh-Morpork food. Show the flag, you know. Do you think I should take a cook along?" "Yes, dear, that would be a good idea. No one outside the city knows how to make a knuckle sandwich properly." Sybil was impressed. Ears operating entirely on automatic had nevertheless triggered the mouth into making a small but pertinent contribution. She said, "Do you think we ought to take the alligator with us?" "Yes, that might be advisable." She watched his face. Small furrows formed on Vimes's brow as the ears nudged the brain. He blinked. "What alligator?" "You were miles away, Sam. In Uberwald, I expect." "Sorry." "Is there a problem?" "Why is he sending me, Sybil?" "I'm sure Havelock shares with me a conviction that you have hidden depths, Sam." Vimes sank gloomily into his armchair. It was, he felt, a persistent flaw in his wife's otherwise practical and sensible character that she believed, against all evidence, that he was a man of many talents. He knew he had hidden depths. There was nothing in them that he'd like to see float to the surface. They contained things that should be left to lie. There was also a nagging worry that he couldn't quite pin down. Had he been able to, he might have expressed it like this. Had he been able to, he might have expressed it like this. Policeman didn't go on holiday. Where you got policeman, as Lord Veterinary was wont to remark, you got crime. So if he went to Bonk, however you pronounce the damn place, there would be a crime. It was something the world always laid on for policemen. It'll be nice to see Seraphine again, said Sybil. Yes, indeed, said Vimes. In Bonk, he would not officially be a policeman. He did not like this at all. He liked this even less than all the other things. On the few occasions he'd been outside Ankh-Morpork and its surrounding fiefdom, he'd either been going to other local cities where the Ankh-Morpork badge carried some weight, or he had been in hot pursuit, that most ancient and honourable of police procedures. From the way Carrot talked, in Bonk his badge would merely figure as extra roughage on someone's menu. His brow wrinkled again. Seraphine? Lady Seraphine von Uberwald, said Sybil. Sergeant Angwa's mother? You remember me telling you last year? We were at finishing school together. Of course, we all knew she was a werewolf, but nobody would ever dream of talking about that sort of thing in those days. Well, you just didn't. There was all that business over the ski instructor, of course, but I'm certain in my own mind that he must have fallen down some crevasse or other. She married the Baron, and they lived just outside Bionk. I write to her with a little news every hogswatch. A very old werewolf family. A good pedigree, said Vimes absently. You know you wouldn't like Angua to hear you say that, Sam. Don't worry so. You'll have a chance to relax. I'm sure. It'll be good for you. Yes, dear. It'll be like a second honeymoon, said Sybil. Yes, indeed, said Vimes, remembering that what with one thing and another, they'd never really had a first one. On that, subject, said Sybil, a little more hesitantly. You remember I told you I was going to see old Mrs. Content? Oh, yes. How is she? Vimes was staring at the fireplace again. It wasn't just old school friends. Sometimes it seemed Sybil kept in touch with anyone she'd ever met. Her Hogswatch card list ran to a second volume. Quite well, I believe. Anyway, she agrees that there was a knocking at the door. She sighed. Oh, it's Willikins' evening off, she said. You'd better answer it, Sam. I know you want to. I've told them not to disturb me unless it's serious, said Vimes, getting up. Yes, but you think all crime is serious, Sam. Carrot was on the doorstep. It's a bit political, sir, he said. What's so political at 9:15 at night, Captain? The Dwarf Bread Museum's been broken into, sir, said Carrot. Vimes looked into Carrot's honest blue eyes. A thought occurs to me, Captain, he said slowly, and the thought is, a certain item has gone missing. That's right, sir, and it's the replica scone. Yes, sir. Either they broke in just after we left, or, Carrot licked his lips nervously, they were hiding while we were there. Not rats, then? No, sir. Sorry, sir. Vimes fastened his cloak and took his helmet off its peg. So, someone has stolen a replica of the scone of stone a few weeks before the real one is due to be used in a very important ceremony, he said. I find this intriguing. That's what I thought too, sir. Vimes sighed. I hate the political ones. When they'd gone, Lady Sybil sat for a while, staring at her hands. Then she took a lamp into the library and pulled down a slim volume bound in white leather on which had been embossed in gold the words, "Our Wedding." It had been a strange event, Ankh-Morpork's high society. So high that it's stinking, Sam always said, had turned up, mostly out of curiosity. She was Ankh-Morpork's most eligible spinster, who'd never thought she'd be married, and he was a mere captain of the guard who tended to annoy a lot of people. And here were the iconographs of the event. There she was, looking rather more expansive than radiant, and there Sam was, scowling at the viewer with his hair hastily smoothed down. There was Sergeant Colin with his chest inflated so much his feet had almost left the ground, and Nobby grinning widely, or perhaps just making a face. It was so hard to tell with Nobby. Sybil turned over the pages with care. She had put a sheet of tissue between each one to protect them. In many ways, she told herself, she was very lucky. She was proud of Sam. He worked hard for a lot of people. He cared about people who weren't important. He always had far more to cope with. He always had far more to cope with than was good for him. He was the most civilized man she'd ever met. Not a gentleman, thank goodness, but a gentle man. She never really knew what it was he did. Oh, she knew what the job was, but by all accounts, he didn't spend much time behind his desk. When he eventually came to bed, he tended to drop his clothes straight into the laundry basket, so she'd only hear later from the laundry girl about the bloodstains and the mud. There were rumors of chases over rooftops, hand-to-hand and knee-to-groin fights with men who had names like Harry the Blot Cutter Weems. There was a Sam Vimes she knew, who went out and came home again. And out there was another Sam Vimes, who hardly belonged to her and lived in the same world as all those men with their dreadful names. Sybil Ramkin had been brought up to be thrifty, thoughtful, genteel in an outdoor sort of way, and to think kindly of people. She looked at the pictures again, in the silence of the house. Then she blew her nose loudly and went off to do the packing and other sensible things. Corporal Sherry Littlebottom pronounced her name Sherry. She was a she, and therefore a rare bloom in Ankh-Morpork. It wasn't that dwarves weren't interested in sex. They saw the vital need for fresh dwarves to leave their goods to and continue the mining work after they had gone. It was simply that they also saw no point in distinguishing between the sexes anywhere but in private. There was no such thing as a dwarfish female pronoun or, once the children were on solids, any such thing as women's work. Then Sherry Littlebottom had arrived in Ankh-Morpork and had seen that there were men out there who did not wear chainmail or leather underwear. Footnote 3. At least of the sort she normally wore. End footnote 3. But did wear interesting colors and exciting makeup, and these men were called women. Footnote 4. And just lately, corporal knobs. And in the little bullet head, the thought had arisen, why not me? Now she was being denounced in cellars and dwarf bars across the city as the first dwarf in Ankh-Morpork to wear a skirt. It was hard wearing brown leather and as objectively erotic as a piece of wood, but, as some older dwarves would point out, somewhere under there were his knees. Side note, footnote 5. They couldn't bring themselves to utter the word her. Worse, they were now finding that among their sons were some, they choked on the word, daughters. Sherry was only the frothy bit on the tip of the wave. Some younger dwarves were shyly wearing eyeshadow and declaring that, as a matter of fact, they didn't like beer. A current was running through dwarf society. Dwarf society was not against a few well-thrown rocks in the direction of those bobbing on the current, but Captain Carrot had put the word on the street that this would be assault on an officer, a subject on which the watch held views, and however short the miscreants, their feet really would not touch the ground. Sherry had retained her beard and round iron helmet, of course. It was one thing to declare that you were female, but quite unthinkable to declare that you weren't a dwarf. "Open and shut case, sir," she said when she saw Vimes come in. "They opened the window in the back room to get in. A very neat job, and didn't shut the front door after they left. Smashed the scones case. There's the glass all round the stand. Didn't take anything else that I can see. Left a lot of footprints in the dust. I took a few pictures, but they're scuffed up and weren't much good in the first place. That's about it, really." "No dropped fag ends, wallets or bits of paper with an address on them?" said Vimes. "No, sir. They were inconsiderate thieves." "They certainly were," said Carrot grimly. "A question that springs to mind," said Vimes, "is why does it reek even worse of cat's piss now?" "It is rather sharp, isn't it?" said Sherry. "With a hint of sulphur, too. Constable Ping said it was like this when he arrived, but there's no cat prints." Vimes crouched down and looked at the broken glass. "How did we find out about this?" he said, prodding a few fragments. "Constable Ping heard the tinkle, sir. He went round the back and saw the window was open. Then the crooks got out through the front door." "Sorry about that, sir," said Ping, stepping forward and saluting. He was a cautious-looking young man who appeared permanently poised to answer a question. "We all make mistakes," said Vimes. "You heard glass break?" "Yes, sir. And someone swore." "Really? What did they say?" Bugger, sir." "And you went around the back and saw the broken window and you—" "I called out, 'Is there anyone there, sir?'" "Really? And what would you have done if a voice had said no?" "No, don't answer that. What happened next?" I heard a lot more glass break, and when I got round to the front... the door was open and they were gone. So I legged it back to the yard and told Captain Carrot, sir, knowing he sets a lot of store by this place." "Thank you. Ping, is it?" "Yes, sir." Entirely unasked, but obviously prepared to answer, Ping said, "It's a dialect word meaning water meadow, sir." "Off you go then." The Lance Constable visibly sagged with relief and left. Vimes let his mind unfocus a little. He enjoyed moments like these, the little bowl of time when the crime lay before him, and he believed that the world was capable of being solved. This was the time you really looked to see what was there, and sometimes the things that weren't there were the most interesting things of all. The scone had been kept on a plinth about 3 feet high, inside a case made of 5 sheets of glass, forming a box that was screwed down on the plinth. "They smashed the glass by accident," he said eventually. "Really, sir?" "Look here, see?" Vimes pointed to 3 loose screws, neatly lined up. "They were trying to take the box apart carefully. It must have slipped." "But what's the point?" said Carrot. "It's just a replica, sir. Even if you could find a buyer, it's not worth more than a few dollars." "If it's a good one, you could swap it with the real thing," said Vimes. "Well, yes, I suppose you could try," said Carrot. "There would be a bit of a problem, though." "What is it?" "Dwarves aren't stupid, sir. The replica has got a big cross carved into the underside, and it's only made of plaster in any case." "Oh, but it was a good idea, sir," Carrot said encouragingly. "You weren't to know." "I wonder if the thieves knew." "Even if they didn't, they wouldn't have a hope of getting away with it, sir." "The real scone is very well guarded," said Sherry. "It's very rare that most dwarves get a chance to see it." "And other people would notice if you had a great lump of rock up your jumper," said Vimes, more or less to himself. "So, this was a stupid crime, but it doesn't feel stupid. I mean, why go to all this trouble? The lock on that door is a joke. You could kick it right out of the woodwork. If I was going to pinch this thing, I could be in here and out again before the glass had stopped tinkling. What would be the point of being quiet at this time of night?" The dwarf had been rummaging under a nearby display cabinet. She drew her hand out. Drying blood glistened on the blade of a screwdriver. "See?" said Vimes. "Something slipped and someone cut their hand. What's the point of all this, Carrot?" Cat's piss and sulphur and screwdrivers. I hate it when you get too many clues. It makes it so damn hard to solve anything." He threw the screwdriver down. By sheer luck, it hit the floorboards tip first and stood there, shuddering. "I'm going home," he said. "We'll find out what this is all about when it starts to smell." Vimes spent the following morning trying to learn about 2 foreign countries. One of them turned out to be called Ankh-Morpork. Uberwald was easy. It was 5 or 6 times bigger than the whole of the Stowe Plains and stretched all the way up to the hub. It was so thickly forested, so creased by little mountain ranges and beset by rivers, that it was largely unmapped. It was mostly unexplored too. Footnote 6. At least by proper explorers. Just living there doesn't count. The people who lived there had other things on their minds, and the people from outside who came to explore went into the forests and never came out again. And for centuries, no one had bothered about the place. You couldn't sell things to people hidden by too many trees. It was probably the coach road that had changed everything a few years back, when they drove it all the way through to Genua. A road is built to follow. Mountain people had always gravitated to the plains, and in recent years, Uberwald folk had joined them. The news got back home. There's money to be made in Ankh-Morpork. Bring the kids. You don't need to bring the garlic though, because all the vampires work down at the kosher butcher's. And if you're pushed in Ankh-Morpork, you're allowed to push back. No one cares enough about you to want to kill you. Vimes could just about tell the difference between the Uberwald dwarves and the ones from Copperhead, who were shorter, noisier, and rather more at home among humans. Uberwald dwarves were quiet, tended to scuttle around corners, and often didn't speak Morporkian. In some of the alleys off Treacle Mine Road, you could believe you were in another country. But they were what every copper desires in a citizen. They were no trouble. They mostly had jobs working for one another. They paid their taxes rather more readily than humans did. Although, to be honest, there were small piles of mouse droppings that yielded more money than most Ankh-Morpork citizens, and generally any problems they had they sorted out amongst themselves. If such people ever come to the attention of the police, it's usually only as a chalk outline. It turned out, though, that within the community, behind the grubby facades of all those tenements and workshops in Cable Street and Whalebone Lane, there were vendettas and feuds that had their origins in two adjoining mine shafts 500 miles away and 1,000 years ago. There were pubs you only drank in if you were from a particular mountain. There were streets you didn't walk down if your clan mined a particular node, a particular load. The way you wore your helmet, the way you parted your beard spoke complicated volumes to other dwarves. They didn't even hand a piece of paper to Vimes. Then there's the way you krasak your gardergug, said Corporal Littlebottom. I won't even ask, said Vimes. I'm afraid I can't explain in any case, said Sherry. Have I got a gardergug? Said Vimes. Sherry winced at the mispronunciation. Yes, sir, everyone has. But only a dwarf can krasak his properly, she said. Or hers, she added. Vimes sighed and looked down at the pages of scrawl in his notebook under the heading Uberwald. He wasn't strictly aware of it, but he treated even geography as if he was investigating a crime. Did you see who carved out the valley? Would you recognize that glacier if you saw it again? I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, Sherry, he said. I shouldn't worry about that, sir. Humans always do, but most dwarves can spot if you're trying not to make them. Are you sure you don't mind coming? Got to face it, sooner or later, sir. Vimes shook his head sadly. I don't get it, Sherry. There's all this fuss about a female dwarf trying to act like a lady, sir? Right, and yet no one says anything about Carrot being called a dwarf, but he's a human. No, sir. Like he says, he's a dwarf. He was adopted by dwarves. He's performed the Yigrad. He observes the Jikargra, insofar as that's possible in a city. He's a dwarf. He's 6 foot Hi! He's a tall dwarf, sir. We don't mind if he wants to be a human as well. Not even the Bloodaxe would have a problem with that. I'm running out of throat, sweet here, Sherry. What was that? Look, sir. Most of the dwarves here are, well, I suppose you'd call them liberals, sir. They're mainly from the mountains behind Copperhead, you know. They get along with humans. Some of them even acknowledge that. Some of them even acknowledge that they've got daughters, sir. But some of the more old-fashioned Uberwald dwarves haven't got out so much. They act as if Brian Bloodaxe was still alive. That's why we call them Bloodaxe. Vimes had a go, but he knew that to really speak dwarfish, you needed a lifetime study and, if at all possible, a serious throat infection. Above ground, they negatively, he faltered. They do not get out in the fresh air enough, Sherry supplied. Ah, right. And everyone thought the new king was going to be one of these. They say Albrecht's never seen sunlight in his life. His clan never goes above ground in daylight. Everyone was certain it'd be him. And as it turned out, it wasn't, thought Vimes. Some of the Uberwald dwarves hadn't supported him, and the world had moved on. There were plenty of dwarves around now who had been born in Ankh-Morpork. Their kids went around with their helmets on, back to front, and spoke dwarvish only at home. Many of them wouldn't know a pickaxe if you hit them with it. Footnote 7. At least if you hit them hard enough. End footnote 7. They weren't about to be told how to run their lives by an old dwarf sitting on a stale bun under some distant mountain. He tapped his pencil on his notebook thoughtfully. And because of this, he thought, dwarves are punching one another on my streets. I've seen more of those dwarf sedan chair things around lately, he said. You know, the ones carried by a couple of trolls. They have thick leather curtains. Bloodaxe, said Sherry. Very traditional dwarves. If they have to go out in daylight, they don't look at it. I don't recall them a year ago. Sherry shrugged. There's lots of dwarves here now, sir. The Bloodaxe feel they're among dwarves now. They don't have to deal with humans for anything. They don't like us. They won't even talk to a human. They're fairly choosy about talking to most dwarves, to tell you the truth. That's daft, said Vimes. How do they get food? You can't live on fungi. How do they trade ore, dam streams, get wood for shoring up their shafts? Well, either other dwarves are paid to do it or humans are employed, said Sherry. They can afford it. They're very good miners. Well, they own very good mines in any case. Sounds to me they're a bunch of... Vimes stopped himself. He was aware that a wise man should always respect the folkways of others, to use Carrot's happy phrase. But Vimes often had difficulty with this idea. For one thing, there were people in the world whose folkways consisted of gutting other people like clams, and this was not a procedure that commanded in Vimes any kind of respect at all. I'm not thinking diplomatically, am I? He said. Sherry watched him with a carefully blank expression. Oh, I don't know about that, sir, she said. You didn't actually finish the sentence, and, well, a lot of dwarves respect them. feel better for seeing them. Vimes looked puzzled. Then understanding dawned. Oh, I get it, he said. I bet they say things like, "Thank goodness people are keeping up the old ways, eh?" That's right, sir. I suppose that inside every dwarf in Ankh-Morpork is a little part of him or her that knows real dwarves live underground. Vimes doodled on his notepad. Back home, he thought. Carrot had innocently talked about dwarves. Back home. To all dwarves, far away, the mountains were back home. It was funny how people were people everywhere you went, even if the people concerned weren't the people who made up the phrase, "people are people everywhere," had traditionally thought of as people. And even if you weren't virtuous, as you had been brought up to understand the term, you did like to see virtue in other people, provided it did not cost you anything. Why have these traditional dwarves come here, though? Ankh-Morpork's full of humans. They must have their work cut out avoiding humans. They're needed, sir. Dwarf law is complicated, and there's often disputes, and they conduct marriages and that sort of thing. You make them sound more like priests. Dwarves aren't religious, sir. Of course. Oh, well, thank you, Corporal. Off you go. Any fallout from last night? No sulphurous, incontinent cats have come forward to confess? No, sir. The Campaign for Equal Heights has put out a pamphlet saying it was another example of the second-class treatment of dwarves in the city. But it was the same one they always put out. You know, the one with blanks to fill in the details. Nothing changes, Sherry. See you tomorrow morning, then. Send Detritus up. Why him? Ankh-Morpork was lousy with diplomats. It was practically what the upper classes were for. And it was easy for them because half the foreign bigwigs they'd meet were old chums they'd played wet towel tag with back at school. They tended to be on first-name terms, even with people whose names were Ahmed or Fong. They knew which fork to use. They hunted, shot, and fished. They moved in circles that more or less overlapped the circles of their foreign hosts, and were a long way from the rather grubby circles that people like Vimes went around in every working day. They knew all the right nods and winks. What chance had he got against a tie and a crest? Veterinary was throwing him amongst the wolves and the dwarves and the vampires. Vimes shuddered, and Veterinary never did anything without a reason. Come in, Detritus. It always amazed Sergeant Detritus that Vimes knew he was at the door. Vimes had never mentioned that the office wall creaked and bent inwards as the big troll made his way along the corridor. You want to see me, sir? Yes. Sit down, man. It's this Uberwald business. Yes, sir. How do you feel about visiting the old country? Detritus's face remained impassive, as it always did when he was waiting patiently for things to make sense. Uberwald, I mean, Vimes prompted. Dunno, sir. I was just a pebble when we left there. Dad wanted a better life in the big city. There'll be a lot of dwarves, Detritus. Vimes didn't bother to mention vampires and werewolves. Either of those who attacked the troll was making the last big mistake of its career in any case. detritus carried a 2,000-pound draw crossbow as a hand weapon.
That's okay, sir. I'm very modern about dwarves.
These might be a bit old-fashioned about you, though.
Them deep-down dwarves?
That's right.
I heard about them.
There's still wars with trolls up near the hub, I hear. Tact and diplomacy will be called for.
You have come to the right troll for that, sir,
said Detritus. You did push that man through that wall last week, Detritus.
It was done with tact, sir. Quite a thin wall.
Vimes let it go at that. The man in question had just laid out 3 watchmen with a club, which Detritus had broken in one hand before selecting the suitably tactful wall. See you tomorrow, then. Best dress armor, remember? Send Angua now, please.
She's not here, sir.
Blast. Put out some messages for her, will you? Igor lurched through the castle corridors, dragging one foot after the other in the approved fashion. He was Igor, son of Igor, nephew of several Igors, brother of Igors, and cousin of more Igors than he could remember without checking up in his diary. Igors did not change a winning formula. Footnote 8. Especially if it was green and bubbled. End footnote 8. And as a clan, Igors liked working for vampires. Vampires kept regular hours, were generally polite to their servants, and, an important extra, didn't require much work in the bed-making and cookery department, and tended to have cool, roomy cellars where an Igor could pursue his true calling. This more than made up for those occasions when you had to sweep up their ashes. He entered Lady Margolota's crypt and knocked politely on the coffin lid. It moved aside a fraction. Yes. Sorry to wake you in the middle of the afternoon, your ladyship, but you did say, all right. And it's going to be Weymouth, ladyship. A dainty hand came out of the partly open coffin and punched the air. Yes! Yes, ladyship. Well, well, Samuel Vimes. Poor devil. To the doggies, no? Igor nodded. The Baroness Igor was also collecting a message, ladyship. And the dwarves? It is an official appointment, ladyship. Everyone knows. His Grace, the Duke of Ankh-Morpork, Sir Samuel Vimes, commander of the Ankh-Morpork 50 Watch. Then the midden has hit the windmill, Igor. Very well put, ladyship. No one liketh a thought sour of it. I imagine, Igor, that he'll leave them behind.